Lieutenant Commander Rebecca Becky. Harrington straightened her uniform and took a deep breath before entering the briefing room. At 34, with 15 years of naval service, she found herself carrying a coffee carafe instead of flying an FA-18 Super Hornet. 3 months at Naval Air Station Oceana, and she was still the coffee girl. "Coffee's here," she announced quietly, setting up the station at the back of the room. Commander Wilson glanced up briefly. "Just set it down over there, Harrington. Try not to spill it this time." She hadn't spilled anything before, but Wilson seemed determined to invent flaws. Becky arranged the cups in perfect rows, her movements efficient from years of aircraft pre-flight checks. The briefing room filled with aviators and intelligence officers preparing for the day's operations briefing. Nobody acknowledged her presence. "Morning, Lieutenant Commander Coffee Pot," Lieutenant Parker whispered as he passed. "Keeping America safe 1 cup at a time." Becky forced a polite smile. "Good morning, Lieutenant." 6 months ago, she'd been leading combat missions over the Persian Gulf. Now, she was assigned to administrative support duties while awaiting what her commanding officer called appropriate reassignment. The official story cited medical reasons following an incident during her last deployment. The truth was more complicated. Commander Wilson addressed the room. "Take your seats. Admiral Preston will be joining us for today's briefing. I expect everyone to be on their best behavior." Becky moved to a corner position, clipboard in hand. Her official duty was to take notes for the squadron's administrative files, but everyone knew it was busy work. Her real expertise, tactical aviation in hostile environments, was being wasted. "Harrington," Wilson called, "make sure the Admiral's coffee is fresh when he arrives." "Yes, sir," she replied, biting back the urge to remind him of her combat record. Lieutenant Parker leaned over to Lieutenant Rodriguez. "You know why she's here, right? Word is she froze up during a mission, couldn't pull the trigger when it counted." Rodriguez glanced at Becky. "Really? Then why keep her in at all?" "Family connections, probably. Her old man was some big shot in the Pentagon." Becky kept her expression neutral. The rumors had started her first week at Oceana. With her service record partially classified, people filled the gaps with speculation, most of it unflattering. Her father had indeed been a Navy captain, but he'd passed away 5 years ago and had never used his position to influence her career. The door opened, and Admiral James Preston entered. At 62, the Admiral was a naval aviation legend with combat experience dating back to Desert Storm. Everyone stood at attention. "As you were," Preston said, his voice carrying authority without volume. Becky remained in her corner, waiting for an appropriate moment to offer coffee. The briefing began with Commander Wilson presenting the day's training operations. Fighter squadrons would be conducting joint exercises with Marine Corps units from Cherry Point. "We'll be simulating close air support missions in contested airspace," Wilson explained, pointing to a map. "Lieutenant Commander Davis will lead the first sortie, with Lieutenant Parker taking the second." Becky noticed a flaw in the flight patterns immediately. The proposed ingress route would expose aircraft to simulated enemy air defenses unnecessarily. She made a note, but knew her input wasn't welcome. Admiral Preston appeared to notice the same issue. "Commander Wilson, that approach vector seems problematic. What's your reasoning?" Wilson hesitated. "It presents a realistic challenge for our pilots, Admiral." "It presents an unrealistic casualty rate," Preston countered. "I'd prefer we train pilots to survive." As the briefing continued, Becky moved quietly to offer coffee to the Admiral. "Coffee, sir?" she asked softly. Admiral Preston turned, his eyes focusing on her name tag. "Thank you, Lieutenant Commander Harrington." As she poured, the Admiral studied her face. "Harrington? Why does that name sound familiar? Have we met before?" "I don't believe so, sir," she replied professionally. The briefing resumed. Becky returned to her corner but noticed the Admiral glancing her way occasionally. During a discussion about communications protocols, Preston interrupted suddenly. "We'll need to ensure proper authentication procedures are followed," Wilson was saying. "Like Kingfish protocols?" the Admiral interjected, his eyes finding Becky across the room. The word hung in the air. Becky froze, coffee pot halfway to the table. "Kingfish?" A call sign nobody in this room should know. A call sign attached to a classified operation that, according to official records, never happened. Her call signed 3 years ago, on a mission she wasn't allowed to discuss. Admiral Preston was watching her reaction carefully. Lieutenant Commander Harrington, you're familiar with Kingfish protocols, I believe. The room went silent, every head turned toward her. Becky carefully set down the coffee pot, her hand steady despite the adrenaline now coursing through her system. Yes, sir, she answered, her voice calm. I'm familiar with those protocols. Commander Wilson looked confused. Admiral, Kingfish isn't part of our standard communications package. I'm not sure what. It wouldn't be in your briefing materials, Commander, the Admiral interrupted. Kingfish was a special operations designation. His eyes never left Becky. Lieutenant Commander Harrington, I'd like you to join the planning staff for the remainder of this briefing. Wilson's face flushed. Sir, Harrington is assigned to administrative duties. She's not cleared for operational planning. The Admiral's expression hardened slightly. I believe I just cleared her, Commander. Lieutenant Commander Harrington, please take a seat at the table. As Becky moved forward, she felt the stares of everyone in the room, some confused, some suspicious. She took a seat at the far end of the conference table, back straight, face composed. Now, Admiral Preston continued, as I was saying about the ingress routes, I believe we need to reconsider our approach. Lieutenant Commander Harrington, what's your assessment of the current plan? Every eye in the room turned to her. Commander Wilson looked as though he'd swallowed something sour. Lieutenant Parker's mouth hung slightly open in disbelief. Becky took a deep breath. For 3 months, she'd been invisible. Now, with a single call sign, the Admiral had not only seen her, he'd recognized exactly who she was. 3 years earlier, Lieutenant Commander Rebecca Harrington had been flying combat missions from the USS Eisenhower in the Persian Gulf. As one of the Navy's few female FA-18 pilots, she'd earned respect through consistent excellence. Her call sign back then had been Raptor, a play on her maiden name, Rapties, and her predatory precision in the air. But Kingfish was different. Kingfish wasn't a personal call sign. It was an operation name, a mission so classified that most of the personnel on the carrier hadn't known it existed. Lieutenant Commander, we're waiting for your assessment, Admiral Preston prompted gently, bringing her back to the present. Becky cleared her throat. The current ingress route exposes our aircraft to multiple threat envelopes simultaneously, she began, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. If we adjust our approach to come in from the southwest, using the ridge line for terrain masking, we reduce exposure time by approximately 40%. She stood and moved to the map, muscle memory taking over as she outlined alternative approaches. The room remained silent as she detailed risk factors, contingencies, and tactical considerations. Commander Wilson finally interrupted. With all due respect, Admiral, these changes would require completely reorganizing our training schedule. Then reorganize it, the Admiral replied simply. Lieutenant Commander Harrington's assessment is sound. As the briefing continued, Becky contributed several more suggestions. Some of the junior officers began directing their questions to her, recognizing her expertise. Commander Wilson grew increasingly uncomfortable. After the meeting, as officers filed out, the Admiral approached her. Lieutenant Commander, my office in 20 minutes. Yes, sir, she replied. Commander Wilson intercepted her in the hallway. What game are you playing, Harrington? You've been here 3 months and never mentioned special operations experience. You never asked, sir, she replied evenly, and most of my service record from that period is classified. Wilson's face hardened. Just because you impressed the Admiral doesn't change your status here. You're still assigned to administrative duties until I say otherwise. Yes, sir, Becky responded, keeping her tone respectful despite the frustration building inside her. 20 minutes later, she knocked on the Admiral's door. Enter, came the response. Admiral Preston sat behind his desk, a file open before him. Have a seat, Lieutenant Commander. As she sat, the Admiral studied her for a moment. I made some calls after I recognized your name, had to pull some strings to access your full service record. He tapped the file. Operation Kingfish, a covert extraction of intelligence assets from a hostile port under the cover of a standard combat air patrol. You were the mission lead. Yes, sir, Becky confirmed, surprised he had obtained the records so quickly. 4 aircraft, flying dark, navigating by starlight through enemy air defense systems to insert a SEAL team. then providing close air support during extraction. The Admiral leaned back. Textbook execution under impossible conditions. You earned the Distinguished Flying Cross for that mission, though the citation was cleverly worded to obscure the actual operation. Becky remained silent. The memories of that night, the tension in the cockpit, the radio discipline, the brief, violent engagement when they were discovered, remained vivid in her mind. What I can't understand, the Admiral continued, is why one of our most decorated combat pilots is serving coffee instead of leading squadrons. Becky chose her words carefully. My last deployment ended prematurely, sir. There was an incident. I know about the incident, Harrington. I read that file too. The Admiral's voice softened slightly. The incident over the Strait of Hormuz, you disobeyed a direct order. 6 months ago, a routine patrol turned crisis when Iranian fast attack boats surrounded an American container ship in international waters. Becky had been leading a 2-plane flight nearby. We were ordered to conduct a show of force only, she explained, not to engage unless the container vessel was fired upon. The Admiral nodded, but you saw something the others didn't. One of the Iranian boats was maneuvering to deploy something in the ship's path. Our intelligence suggested they had been practicing mine deployments in the area. Becky's jaw tightened at the memory. I requested permission to intervene. It was denied. So you broke formation, dropped to deck level, and buzzed the Iranian boat so close that the downdraft disrupted their operation, the Admiral finished. Without firing a shot, you prevented what could have been a disastrous incident. The problem was I disobeyed a direct order from Fleet Command, Becky finished. And in doing so, I embarrassed some very senior officers who had issued that order. You also created a minor diplomatic incident. The Iranians claimed you nearly crashed into their vessel deliberately. It wasn't deliberate, sir, but it was necessary. Admiral Preston studied her for a moment. The official report cites your actions as reckless and insubordinate. Your previous commanding officer recommended administrative discharge. Becky's face remained impassive, though the words still stung. Yes, sir. Yet here you are serving coffee instead of flying or being discharged. The Admiral tapped the file again. Someone intervened on your behalf. Any idea who? No, sir. I assumed my career was over when they pulled me from flight status. The Admiral closed the file. Captain Alina Matthijs, does that name mean anything to you? Becky straightened in her chair. Captain Matthijs was the intelligence officer who planned Operation Kingfish. She coordinated our mission from 5th Fleet Headquarters. She's Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence now, the Admiral explained. When your case crossed her desk, she recognized your name. She couldn't overturn the reprimand, but she made sure you weren't discharged. You were supposed to be reassigned to a position befitting your experience after a cooling-off period. Instead, I've been serving coffee for 3 months, Becky said, unable to keep a hint of bitterness from her voice. An oversight I intend to correct. The Admiral stood. Commander Wilson wasn't briefed on your background, just told to find a place for you temporarily. He made assumptions based on the limited information he had. With respect, sir, he made assumptions because I'm a woman who got in trouble. The details didn't matter. The Admiral didn't disagree. What matters now is putting your skills to proper use. I'm assigning you to my staff as a tactical aviation advisor, effective immediately. I'm also recommending you for reinstatement to flight status, though that may take some time given the political sensitivities. For the first time in months, Becky felt a glimmer of hope. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet, Lieutenant Commander. Some people won't be happy about this reassignment. You've made enemies and they won't disappear overnight. The Admiral's expression was serious. The path back won't be easy. I understand, sir. I'm prepared for whatever comes next. As she left the Admiral's office, Becky knew he was right. The path ahead would be difficult, but after months of invisibility, at least now she had a path. In the hallway, she passed Lieutenant Parker and several other pilots who had been in the briefing. Their conversation stopped abruptly as she approached. She could feel their eyes on her as she walked by, their curiosity and skepticism almost tangible. One voice carried clearly after she passed. Kingfish? What the hell is Kingfish? Becky allowed herself a small smile. Some questions didn't have unclassified answers. The next morning, Becky reported to her new office in the command building. The small space had been hastily cleared for her use. evidenced by the dust outlines where pictures had recently hung, and a desk calendar still showing dates from 3 months ago. As she arranged her few belongings, Commander Wilson appeared in the doorway, his expression tightly controlled. "Lieutenant Commander Harrington," he said stiffly, "I understand congratulations are in order, quite a promotion from coffee duty." "Thank you, sir," Becky replied neutrally, recognizing the thinly veiled resentment. "The Admiral has requested you join this morning's operational planning session." Wilson handed her a folder. "These are the preliminary briefing materials. Try not to append everything we've been working on, will you?" Before she could respond, he continued. "Whatever special operation you were part of, whatever impressed the Admiral so much, that's ancient history. Here you're unproven, remember that." "I understand, sir. I'm here to contribute, not disrupt." Wilson seemed unsatisfied with her diplomatic response. "Just so we're clear, Harrington, you report to me, not directly to the Admiral. Don't mistake his interest for special privilege." "Of course, Commander." As Wilson left, Becky opened the folder and reviewed the materials. The upcoming joint exercise was more complex than she'd initially realized. 3 carrier air wings would be coordinating with Marine Corps Aviation and Army Ground Forces in the largest multi-service training operation of the year. She spotted several issues with the air tasking orders immediately, but remembered Wilson's warning. This wasn't the time to suggest sweeping changes. She needed to build credibility first. At the planning session, Becky took a seat near the back of the room. Many of the officers present had been at yesterday's briefing, and she felt their curious glances. Admiral Preston arrived last, nodding to her briefly as he took his place at the head of the table. "Let's begin," he said. "Commander Wilson, please update us on the carrier group integration plan." Wilson presented confidently, outlining how the 3 carrier air wings would coordinate their operations. When he finished, the Admiral looked around the room. "Questions, concerns?" The room remained silent. Becky hesitated, then raised her hand slightly. "Lieutenant Commander Harrington," the Admiral acknowledged. "Sir, the current plan has all 3 carriers operating within a 50-mile radius. While that simplifies coordination, it creates a concentrated target area that in a real-world scenario would be vulnerable to submarine or missile attack." Wilson's jaw tightened. "This is a training exercise, Lieutenant Commander. We're not actually concerned about enemy submarines." "With respect, sir, we should train as we fight," Becky countered. "If we disperse the carrier groups and practice long-range coordination, we develop capabilities that would be crucial in actual combat conditions." Admiral Preston nodded thoughtfully. "An excellent point. Commander Wilson, please work with Lieutenant Commander Harrington to develop alternative positioning options that maintain effective coordination while dispersing our assets more realistically." Wilson's face reddened slightly, but he nodded. "Yes, sir." The meeting continued, with Becky offering occasional insights based on her combat experience. She was careful to frame her comments as suggestions rather than criticisms, but she could feel Wilson's growing frustration. After the meeting, Lieutenant Rodriguez approached her. "That was impressive, Harrington. Not many people would challenge Wilson's plan in their first meeting." "I wasn't challenging, just suggesting," Becky replied. Rodriguez smiled. "Well, your suggestions made more sense than what we've been working with. Some of us have had concerns about the concentration of forces, but Wilson doesn't like his plans questioned." "I'm learning that," Becky said dryly. "A bunch of us are grabbing lunch in the officers' mess. Want to join?" The invitation surprised her. After months of isolation, the simple gesture of inclusion felt significant. "I'd like that, thank you." At lunch, the conversation initially revolved around the exercise planning, but inevitably turned to her. "So," Lieutenant Parker asked, "what exactly is Kingfish?" The Admiral dropped that name like we were supposed to know what it meant. Becky took a sip of water. "It's classified, Lieutenant. I can't discuss it." "Oh, come on," Parker pressed. "We all have security clearances." "Not for this," she said firmly. Rodriguez changed the subject. "How long were you flying Hornets before, whatever happened?" 8 years, 2 deployments on the Lincoln, 1 on the Eisenhower." "Combat missions?" another pilot asked. 67, she answered simply. The table fell silent for a moment. 67, Parker repeated. That's more than anyone at this table combined. Becky shrugged slightly. Right place, right time, or wrong place, wrong time, depending on your perspective. The conversation shifted to shared experiences, difficult landings, close calls, the unique challenges of carrier operations. For the first time since arriving at Oceana, Becky felt like a naval aviator again, not just an administrator. As they were finishing lunch, Commander Wilson entered the mess, accompanied by Captain Thomas, the base executive officer. They spotted Becky and headed directly toward her table. "Lieutenant Commander Harrington," Captain Thomas said, "I understand you've joined the Admiral's planning staff." Becky stood. "Yes, sir, as of this morning. I'd like to see you in my office at 1400. There are some administrative matters we need to discuss regarding your reassignment." "Of course, sir." As they walked away, Parker leaned in. "That doesn't sound good. Thomas is Wilson's golf buddy. They go way back." Becky nodded, unsurprised. "The Admiral warned me this wouldn't be easy." At 1400 precisely, Becky reported to Captain Thomas's office. The captain sat behind his desk, Commander Wilson standing beside him. Neither invited her to sit. "Lieutenant Commander," Captain Thomas began, "I've been reviewing your personnel file. There seems to be some confusion about your status here at Oceana." "Sir?" "You were assigned to this base for administrative duties pending further evaluation of your fitness for operational roles. Admiral Preston's intervention, while well-intentioned, bypassed standard protocols." Becky maintained her composure. "The Admiral has authority to assign personnel to his staff, sir." "Yes, he does," Thomas agreed. "However, as base executive officer, I have responsibility for ensuring all personnel are properly qualified for their assignments." He slid a document across the desk. "This is a mandatory psychological evaluation. All personnel involved in the planning of combat operations must be cleared by medical staff." Becky recognized the tactic immediately. The evaluation would take weeks, possibly months, effectively sidelining her from the Admiral's staff while maintaining the appearance of following procedures. "I understand, sir," she said, taking the document. "When is this evaluation scheduled?" "The medical department is quite backed up at the moment," Wilson interjected. "Probably 2 to 3 weeks before they can see you." "In the meantime," Thomas continued, "you'll return to your previous administrative duties. We can't have uncleared personnel participating in operational planning." Becky weighed her options carefully. Direct confrontation would only reinforce their perception of her as insubordinate. But accepting this bureaucratic maneuver meant surrendering the opportunity the Admiral had given her. "Captain," she said respectfully, "I believe Admiral Preston expects me at tomorrow morning's planning session. Perhaps we should consult with him before changing my assignment status." Thomas's expression hardened. "Are you suggesting I need the Admiral's permission to manage personnel under my command, Lieutenant Commander?" "Not at all, sir. I'm merely suggesting that professional courtesy might warrant informing him of this change, given his direct interest in my assignment." Wilson stepped forward. "That sounds remarkably like insubordination, Harrington, the same attitude that got you removed from flight status in the first place." Before Becky could respond, a knock came at the door. A yeoman entered and handed Captain Thomas a note. The captain read it, his expression changing slightly. "It seems the Admiral is requesting your presence in his office immediately, Lieutenant Commander," Thomas said, his tone cooler. "We'll continue this discussion later." Becky was escorted directly to Admiral Preston's office by the yeoman. Inside, she found not only the Admiral, but also a woman in civilian clothing whom she recognized immediately. "Captain Matthijs," Becky said, surprised. Elinor Matthijs, now Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence, smiled slightly. "It's actually Rear Admiral Matthijs now, Lieutenant Commander. Good to see you again." Admiral Preston gestured to a chair. "Have a seat, Harrington. I believe you were just meeting with Captain Thomas." "Yes, sir. He had some concerns about my assignment to your staff." "I'm aware," Preston replied dryly. "Fortunately, Admiral Matthijs has brought something that should resolve those concerns." Matthijs opened a folder and removed an official document bearing the seal of the Secretary of the Navy. "Lieutenant Commander Harrington, this is a formal commendation for your actions in the Strait of Hormuz 6 months ago." Becky stared in confusion. "Ma'am." Subsequent intelligence revealed that the Iranian vessel you deterred was indeed attempting to deploy a mine in the path of the container ship, Matthijs explained. Your action, while technically contrary to your orders at the time, prevented an international incident that would have resulted in significant loss of life and potential military escalation. She handed the document to Becky. The secretary has determined that your judgment in that situation deserves commendation rather than censure. Your record has been amended accordingly. Additionally, Admiral Preston added, this removes any administrative barriers to your full reinstatement. Captain Thomas's concerns about your fitness for duty have been rendered moot. Becky looked at the document in her hands, hardly believing what she was reading. After 6 months of having her judgment questioned, her career derailed. Here was vindication in black and white. Thank you, she said quietly, both of you. Don't thank us yet, Admiral Matthijs cautioned. This won't make your path easy. Some people form opinions that facts can't easily change. I understand, ma'am. Admiral Preston stood. Lieutenant Commander, report to the flight line at 700 tomorrow. It's time you got back in the cockpit. As Becky left the office, the document clutched in her hand, she felt a complex mixture of emotions: vindication, relief, apprehension. The battle for respect wasn't over, but for the first time in months, she was back in the fight. At 6:45 the next morning, Becky stood on the flight line, watching the rising sun cast long shadows across the tarmac. She wore her flight suit for the first time in 6 months, the fabric familiar against her skin. Her helmet bag hung from her shoulder, containing the helmet she'd never unpacked after arriving at Oceana. Lieutenant Rodriguez approached, also in a flight suit. Morning, Harrington. Heard you're joining us today. That's the plan, she confirmed. Admiral's orders. Rodriguez grinned. Wilson is furious, Thomas too. Word is they tried to ground you on a technicality and someone way up the chain shut them down. Something like that, Becky acknowledged. More pilots arrived for the morning briefing. Some nodded to Becky, others seemed surprised to see her in a flight suit. Lieutenant Parker arrived last, eyebrows rising when he spotted her. Harrington, you're flying today. If the aircraft will have me, she replied with a small smile. The pre-flight briefing was conducted by Commander Wilson, who acknowledged Becky's presence with barely concealed displeasure. Lieutenant Commander Harrington will be joining Alpha Flight as observer too. Lieutenant Rodriguez, you'll be responsible for her. Rodriguez nodded. Yes, sir. Becky maintained her professional demeanor, though the designation stung. Observer status meant she wouldn't be piloting, just riding along. It was standard procedure for pilots who had been off flight status, but it felt like another attempt to minimize her role. After the briefing, as they walked to the aircraft, Rodriguez spoke quietly. Sorry about the observer status, Wilson insisted. It's procedure, Becky replied, though they both knew exceptions were often made for experienced pilots. At the FA-18F Super Hornet, Rodriguez grinned. I'm taking the back seat, you're flying. Becky stopped short. That's not what Wilson ordered. Admiral's orders trump Wilson's, Rodriguez said, handing her a sealed envelope. This came this morning. You're officially redesignated as mission pilot, not observer. I'm your WSO today. Becky opened the envelope. Inside was a brief note on Admiral Preston's letterhead. Lieutenant Commander Harrington is authorized as pilot in command, effective immediately. Any questions should be directed to me personally. For the first time in months, Becky felt a genuine smile spread across her face. Well then, Lieutenant, let's go flying. The pre-flight checks came back to her like muscle memory, the flow of switches and systems familiar under her hands. As she settled into the cockpit, a sense of rightness washed over her. This was where she belonged. Tower Raptor 2-1, requesting clearance for takeoff, she said into her radio, using her old call sign for the first time since returning to Oceana. Raptor 2-1 Tower, you are cleared for takeoff, runway 27. The Hornet roared down the runway and lifted into the clear morning sky. Becky felt the familiar pressure as the aircraft climbed rapidly, banking toward the training area off the coast. 3 other Hornets formed up with them, creating a 4-ship formation for the morning's exercise. Feels good, doesn't it? Rodriguez's voice came through her headset. Better than good, Becky replied, executing a perfect roll to demonstrate her point. Easy there, Raptor, Rodriguez laughed. Save something for the exercise. For the next 2 hours, they ran through a series of combat scenarios, with Becky's aircraft taking the role of mission lead for several engagements. Her skills were sharp despite the months away from the cockpit. The complex dance of modern air combat, managing radar, weapon systems, communications, and aircraft performance simultaneously, came naturally to her. As they returned to base, Tower contacted them with an unexpected instruction. Raptor 2-1, divert to approach pattern Bravo, VIP observer on deck 1. Becky acknowledged and adjusted her approach. Pattern Bravo would take them directly past the observation deck, where distinguished visitors often watched flight operations. As they passed the deck, she performed a perfect wing wave, tilting the aircraft side to side in a gesture of respect. Through her canopy, she could see Admiral Preston standing on the deck with several other officers and what appeared to be civilian officials in suits. She couldn't make out their faces at her speed, but the presence of VIPs explained the special approach pattern. After landing and completing post-flight procedures, Becky and Rodriguez were approached by a yeoman. Lieutenant Commander Harrington, Admiral Preston requests your presence in the main conference room immediately. Rodriguez raised his eyebrows. Looks like your flying caught someone's attention. In the conference room, Becky found Admiral Preston with the group she'd seen on the observation deck. 2 Navy admirals she didn't recognize, Admiral Mathies, and 3 civilians in expensive suits. Captain Thomas and Commander Wilson stood rigidly to one side, their expressions unreadable. Lieutenant Commander Harrington, Admiral Preston greeted her. Excellent flying today. I trust it felt good to be back in the cockpit. Yes, sir. Thank you for the opportunity. Preston turned to the group. Gentlemen, this is Lieutenant Commander Rebecca Harrington, the officer I mentioned. One of the civilian men stepped forward, extending his hand. Commander, I'm Secretary Davidson, Department of the Navy. These are my colleagues from the Defense Intelligence Agency and Naval Special Warfare Command. Becky shook his hand, confusion evident on her face. It's an honor, sir, but I'm not sure I understand why I'm here. Admiral Mathies spoke up. Lieutenant Commander, do you recall the mission parameters of Operation Kingfish? Of course, ma'am. Joint Aviation Special Operations mission to extract intelligence assets from a denied area under the cover of routine flight operations. We're planning something similar, Secretary Davidson said, but on a larger scale and with significantly higher stakes. Admiral Preston gestured to the conference table. Please have a seat. What we're about to discuss is classified at the highest levels. For the next hour, Becky listened, as the group outlined a mission that made Kingfish look like a training exercise. A critical intelligence asset, an engineer with knowledge of a hostile nation's advanced weapons system, needed extraction from a heavily defended port facility. The mission would require precision flying through sophisticated air defense systems, followed by close air support during the extraction. We need someone who's done this before, Admiral Mathies explained. Someone who understands both the aviation and special operations aspects. Someone who can make split-second decisions when plans inevitably change. Becky looked around the table. Sir, with respect, there must be dozens of aviators with more recent experience who could lead this mission. None with your specific experience, Secretary Davidson countered. Operation Kingfish is the closest analog we have to what we're planning, and you were the mission lead. Commander Wilson, who had remained silent until now, cleared his throat. Secretary, if I may, Lieutenant Commander Harrington has been off flight status for 6 months. Her recent record includes a significant instance of insubordination. Is she really the best choice for such a critical mission? The Secretary turned to Wilson. Commander, I've reviewed Lieutenant Commander Harrington's full service record, including the classified portions you haven't seen. The insubordination you reference has been reclassified as a commendable action that prevented an international incident. His voice hardened slightly. Furthermore, I've spoken with several officers who served with her during Operation Kingfish and subsequent missions. They were unanimous in their assessment of her abilities. Wilson fell silent, his face flushing. Admiral Preston turned to Becky. The decision is yours, Lieutenant Commander. This mission is entirely voluntary. Given the risks involved, no one would question you for declining. Becky considered for a moment. When would this mission take place, sir? Planning begins immediately. Execution within 2 weeks. And my roles. Mission Commander, Admiral Mathies answered. You'd oversee both the aviation element and coordinate with the Special Operations Team, full operational authority within mission parameters. Becky took a deep breath. I volunteer, sir. Excellent, Secretary Davidson said. Admiral Preston will handle the administrative details of your temporary reassignment to the Joint Task Force. You'll be briefed on the full mission parameters tomorrow. As the meeting concluded, people began filing out of the conference room. Commander Wilson approached her, his expression now carefully neutral. It appears I misjudged you, Lieutenant Commander, he said stiffly. Good luck with your mission. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was as close as she was likely to get. Thank you, Commander. Admiral Preston waited until everyone else had left before addressing her. You understand what this means, Harrington? Success in this mission would not only restore your career, but likely accelerate it. Failure could be catastrophic, she finished. I understand the stakes, sir. I knew you would, the Admiral smiled slightly. That's why I said Kingfish in that briefing room 3 days ago. I recognized your name from Admiral Mathies's reports. I needed to see if you were the same officer she described, someone who remained steady under pressure, who maintained her skills and composure even when relegated to serving coffee. Becky allowed herself a small smile. So that was a test. Everything's a test in our line of work, Lieutenant Commander. The Admiral extended his hand. You passed this one, now go prepare for the next. 2 weeks later, Becky stood on the flight deck of the USS Gerald R. Ford, performing final checks on her FA-18. The carrier was positioned in international waters, close enough to launch aircraft, but far enough to maintain plausible deniability if things went wrong. Lieutenant Rodriguez approached, now assigned as her weapons systems officer for the mission. Aircraft is checked and ready, Commander. Special Operations Team is aboard their transport. Weather report, she asked, scanning the darkening horizon. Cloud cover at 3,000 feet. Visibility below clouds approximately 4 miles. Wind from the northwest at 15 knots. Perfect, Becky nodded. Enough cloud cover to hide in if needed, but not so much that it would complicate low-altitude operations. As they completed final preparations, Captain Thomas appeared on the flight deck, accompanied by Admiral Preston. Both men approached Becky. Lieutenant Commander, Captain Thomas said, I owe you an apology. When you arrived at Oceana, I made assumptions based on incomplete information. I allowed those assumptions to color my judgment. Becky was surprised by the admission. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. Admiral Preston has explained some aspects of your previous service as much as he's permitted to share. It's clear now why you were frustrated being assigned to administrative duties. Thomas extended his hand. Good hunting tonight, Commander. Come home safe. After Thomas departed, Admiral Preston spoke quietly. Your call sign for this mission is Kingfish Actual. The moment you launch, you have full operational authority. Trust your instincts. They've served you well so far. Thank you, sir, Becky replied, pulling on her flight helmet. As she climbed into the cockpit, Rodriguez already settled in the back seat. She thought about how much had changed in just 2 weeks. From serving coffee in the briefing room to commanding a classified joint operation. All because an admiral had said one call sign that stopped the room. Kingfish Actual to all units, she said into her radio as the catapult officer gave the signal to prepare for launch. Mission is go. Maintain radio discipline until target area. The catapult fired, hurling her aircraft into the night sky. As the Super Hornet climbed into the darkness, Lieutenant Commander Rebecca Harrington wasn't thinking about the coffee pot in the briefing room, or Commander Wilson's dismissive attitude, or the months spent in administrative exile. She was thinking about the mission ahead, the plans she'd developed, the contingencies she'd prepared, the men and women now following her lead into potentially hostile territory. She was back where she belonged, not just in the cockpit, but in command. Kingfish Flight, form up, she ordered, watching as the other aircraft joined in tight formation around her. We have work to do.